Okay.
Okay, welcome everybody. Third meeting of the Stakeholder Working Group, Group 1. Remember that this is a recorded meeting, so I always have to do this little introduction thing, so we've got a good record. So I want to go around and have everybody introduce themselves for the record, who they are, who they represent. Bruce Sudeloff, Director of the Auto Industry Division.
Chris Rouse, Auto Industry Division.
Randall Cherry, Office of the Attorney General.
Y.E. Scott, Office of the Attorney General.
John Shenton, former dealer.
Todd O'Connell, Colorado Independent Automobile Dealers Association.
Mike McKinnon, CIADA.
Michael Domermuth here on behalf of CADA.
Tammy McCoy, CADA.
Tim Jackson, President of CADA.
Steve Perkins, used motor vehicle dealer and former motor vehicle dealer board member.
Rick Weinkoop on behalf of the Leaguer Colorado Consumers.
Matt Heap, Auto Industry Division.
Thank you all. What I did was I sent out an email to all of you, I believe, on the 20th, which included an agenda and then everything that had been submitted to that point by the group. The agenda that I sent out, I believe, is still applicable for today's meeting, and so we will follow that. What I received back from the group was an email text message from Mr. Domermuth, a memo from Mr. Weinkoop, a proposed draft from Mr. Weinkoop for Form 2434, proposed draft from CIADA for Form 2434, and proposed draft rule for motor vehicle from the Attorney General's office, a proposed draft rule for power sports from the Attorney General's office, and a proposed draft for Form 2434 from the AG's office. If you can recall what we decided at the last meeting, I think what we did have consensus on was that there would be a movement to unembed Form 2434 from the rule, which would necessitate us actually writing a rule and then determining whether or not we wanted to go forward with the unembedded form in addition. So what happened was when we got the email from what the division did, when we received Mr. Domermuth, Mr. Weinkoop's, and CIADA's combination of Mr. O'Connell, Mr. McKinnon's 2434, I had a meeting with my staff, Mr. Heap, Ms. Rouse, and Ms. Scott from the AG's office. We looked at what you all had submitted as the latest information, including the memos. And then Ms. Scott took all that information and we as a group kind of debated the kind of good, the bad, and the ugly of everything that we saw in front of us and what we knew. And asked Ms. Scott with some direction from the staff to move forward with what she has proposed or sent back to me, and I sent it to everybody on about the 20th. As far as discussion today, I think it is open discussion in the first hour here to look at what everybody submitted, including what came from the AG's office, and see where we're at the end of the first hour. I do believe that this will be the last meeting of this group. I do believe that there has been great debate on this subject. I don't believe that we will reach consensus on these matters. I don't know that I expected us to reach consensus going in. But what will have to happen is, at the end of this meeting, the division will take everything into consideration that has happened in these three meetings, everything into consideration what has been submitted, and the division will no doubt draft some rule, notice some rule, and then the debate begins in one way or another before the board, because ultimately this is the board's rule. The board is the agency that promulgates. And so I think that's where we're probably headed. I did do a little bit of research into timeframes, and I'm probably jumping to agenda item 5, but I'll just throw it out now. If the division drafted some rule and uploaded it next week or the week after, we would be looking at having a hearing, I believe, no earlier than the middle of April, probably at the last board meeting in April. And that would be when the hearing would happen, and then it would go to the AG's office, it would go to OLLS, go through that process. The earliest that a rule could be promulgated is the middle of June at the earliest. So that's sort of the rough draft timeframe of that. Any questions about any of that information that I just gave out?
So the board makes the rules, not the executive director?
The board makes the board is the agency that promulgates these rules. And it's kind of that is not a new process, but this, what we're doing is a new process. Mr. Camerzell, who is my boss, probably will step into the room at some point in time if you have any questions about the rulemaking process. He probably right now is the leading expert in the state on the rulemaking process, because everything that's happened with marijuana that he has been involved with since day one. But basically, these stakeholder meetings take place, interested parties, stakeholders come in, get all kinds of input. Eventually, the agency then drafts a rule, and usually drafts a rule in conjunction with the AG's office, or the AG's office drafts a rule in conjunction with the agency. It is uploaded into the Secretary of State's office, and then that kicks off all these timeframes. And the timeframes happen. So what would happen is once it's noticed at the AG's office, there's blast emails that are sent out to everybody, and then the official record starts taking place where people can write in objections to what they think is wrong with the rule or supporting the rule, which can be very voluminous in nature. Then we put together, the agency has to put together an official rulemaking record for the board, which in this case probably will be fairly voluminous, of dozens and dozens and dozens of pages of documentation, plus 3 recordings for them to listen to if they want to listen to these meetings. They will get that generally about a week in advance of their rulemaking hearing, so they know kind of the flavor of everything. They hold the rulemaking hearing, which everybody has the ability to testify at, public comment, testify from anybody that is in attendance here today. And then there will be a period where the board makes a decision whether to move forward with the rule as it has been noticed, or make changes to the rule. And let the AG's office comment on that. They can stop the rulemaking process. They have some power to do some things at that point in time. If they move forward with the rule as it has been drafted, then like I said, it goes to the AG's office, the OLLS, or DORA, I believe, for them to look at the critical issues that they look at, and eventually, if there are no critical issues, then there's a date certain when the rule becomes effective. So that's sort of the process. Questions on that? Okay. Okay, so that brings us to agenda item 4. And I'm going to open the floor up to whoever wants to comment on anything that they received or that they submitted and would like the group to talk about. Oh, let me back up one thing. I did get an email this morning from Mr. Booth, and I think it's important that I make that part of the record. front of me. Mr. Abood came to, Executive Director of the Power Sports Association. Okay, Mr. Abood came to the first meeting, did not come to the second meeting, had some, I believe it was knee surgery. Didn't go real well, so he got laid up for a period of time. I've talked to him on the phone a couple of times, but he sent me this email. He is on the mend, by the way, and he could not come here because he cannot drive, okay? But what he wanted to, for me to put into the record, and this email will actually become part of the record, but what he asked me to consider reading in the record is that PDAC, which is the Power Sport Dealers Association of Colorado, formally agrees with CADA's stance and our requested our position be read into the record or in lieu of that process, that this email be introduced into the record to express our agreement with the CADA position as reflected in their council's written comments. I did not talk to Mr. Booth. I assume that he's talking about the most recent comments from Mr. Dommermuth. So that is now officially part of the record. Now, anybody want to start this off today?
Just for clarification, we had some discussion at the last meeting relative to notifying a customer within 10 calendar days. And I noticed in the AG's written documentation that they submitted that it was going to be within 3 days of rejection by a potential lender. I thought we had clarified the 10-day issue, that the customer would be notified within 10 days of the contract date. And I was wondering what the difference was and why would we have the 3-day. I think anytime you get a notification from a lender, I mean, generally, the dealer's gonna get right with the consumer and get the ball rolling. So just because it says 10 days, some agreements take longer than 3. And it's kind of what we got.
Can you address that?
Let me, and then I'll turn it over because I'll let her address that. Is that 3 days, Mr. Shannon, and I'm aware of that, was that in the proposed rule or in the proposed?
It's in the
It's in
proposed
both the
AGs.
proposed rules under section D1,
On page 2.
bailment. And it's on both of them.
Right.
And the form still says 10 days. Yeah.
I will let Ms. Scott explain that. Her and I did have a discussion about that several days ago. But what I do want to just call everybody's attention to, this very issue, this 3-day versus a 10-day, was debated the last time we attempted to go through rulemaking, that when I stopped the rulemaking process. There was a debate before the board at that point in time, and I don't know if you remember that, but the board debated this issue somewhat, and the issue was that the 10 days been there in the statute V, okay, the rejection of financing, but there was this concern from strictly a consumer protection concept that many times when a dealer shops this out, and this came from Ms. Thompson, I believe, on the board, when the dealer shops out a contract, they are notified within a very short period of time, her 3 days, that we will not touch, we will not finance this deal, we won't. So you got A, B, C, D finance company, and A says within 3 days, we will not touch this contract. The board debated that, and I don't remember what the consensus, if there was a consensus, Mr. Schuman, but it was, should a consumer be notified on the first of the first rejection? Because then does the consumer, is it up to the consumer then to make a decision right then on whether or not they want to bring the car back until the financing is approved? So that was the debate some time ago, okay? So I think that's the reason. Now I'm going to shift to Ms. Scott of why she put it in that way and left it in that way, so.
The 10-day is set for total rejection. So they've got to know within 10 days that they've been rejected. This is just, the 3 days is just the initial. And if you put 10 days for the initial rejection, say you sign the contract on Friday, you don't even contact, or on Saturday, and you don't contact the bank until Monday. If they tell you on Tuesday that they're not gonna do it, if you put 10 days, you're already past your 10 day that the contract says. You have to let them know it's rejection. See what I'm saying?
Well, if you do it Friday and you get an answer on Tuesday, that's still not 10 days.
No, but if you get an answer that rejects it.
Well, that's
But
from
you
one
still,
lender.
but from one lender, okay?
Or two, maybe, but maybe there are other lenders you can send it to.
And that's what we're saying, is the consumer has to make the decision whether or not they say, well, if they rejected me, will the others reject me as well? Should I bring the car back? Because they don't have to pay bailment for the rest of those days. They get to make the decision whether they want to continue and then end up eating up, for bailment charges for additional days. They can stop the process right there.
See, that's why this whole framework doesn't work. Because the consumer has no input. They're not in this loop of the dealer trying to sell the contract and what terms are being offered by Westlake or whoever, what the discount rate is, what the advance rate is, yield spread, whatever the terms are. The consumer has no input on this. If the dealership says, okay, Westlake's gonna give me, 90% advance and whatever, who's still left, Onyx, it's gonna be 95. Consumer doesn't have any input on that. It's the same contract rate, but the consumer doesn't have any input on it.
And the consumer doesn't need to have input on the terms of how you're gonna shop the deal. All they need to know is, have I been rejected? If I've been rejected by one, then I get to decide whether or not I wanna continue to let you shop it or wait for the others to come in. That's the purpose of the 3 day.
But
And actually what Jeff Thompson said is, you probably know within a day or two. If you can't know within an hour or a day or two, she said, fire the finance guy. That's what she said at the board meeting.
see, the fundamental problem is, it's not rejection. The dealership has the ultimate choice of what they want to sell that contract for. Right? They can discount that all day long. They can say, oh, okay, I'll take 80% advance. I'll take 75, 60. It's totally within the dealership's decision-making on that. It's not they're not a conduit. I mean, this is a negotiated process between dealerships who are creditors under the retail installment contract and their potential assignees. So I don't know how we can put the decision-making on the consumer in terms of what the dealership is gonna cut with a third-party assignee. It doesn't make any sense. So they gotta know, you call them 3 days later and say, hey, we couldn't sell this contract. And so what does the consumer say? Well, take less for it.
No, it's not a matter of what they're selling the contract for. It's, you told the consumer you're going to try and, you're gonna sell them the car at 14% interest, okay?
Okay.
And then you go and you try and sell it, and it says, I'm not gonna buy a contract because the interest rate is higher, okay? So they'll call back and they'll say, well, we couldn't get you 14%, we could get you 18%. That's what they're trying to avoid.
Let me give you another scenario. Say you've got a contract rate of 21%, okay? And then everyone here knows we have a buy rate, and that's the rate between the dealer and the assignee, okay? So you've got a contract rate of 21%, and you go to Westlake and they say, well, Westlake only does 21%, but pick whoever. ABC Finance. ABC Finance said, and typically they'll give you a 2-point yield, right? So 19%. And so ABC Finance says, nah, we don't want to do 19% on this one. Well, the dealer can always come back and say, how about 18? How about 17? They can discount that contract to where someone will want to buy it. And I'll buy every risk in this room that you got problems with. Give me $100, I'll give you $100 for it. You can sell it, it's a matter of what the price is. So how the consumer has any input on, I want you to keep shopping this, because they have no influence on the terms. Which again, going back to what I keep preaching, if they don't have any skin in the game in terms of any input in the terms, they shouldn't have any skin in the game as far as a bailment goes or a per diem. Okay, they have no control over how someone can sell a contract. So why should they float the dealership trying to sell a contract?
There's
If the
nothing
deal-
to stop the customer from going out and getting their own financing and doing it that way. There is no rule, regulation, or law that stops them from getting their own financing.
You're
And some
absolutely-
do, and some do, many do. They'll come to the dealership and they've
The
already,
majority don't, it's 80% dealer financing.
well, because it's convenient, because they do have their.
I'm not arguing against dealer financing. Knock yourself out, I'm not arguing against spot delivery. I'm just saying, don't put it on a consumer's back while the car dealer is trying to make a deal.
Well, I
Let's
think
get back to
Let's
the
go, Steve.
original conversation with the board, if I remember correctly, and those of you that were there, correct me if I'm wrong, was that if the dealership's trying to get somebody to buy the contract, and the first one says, no, we're gonna reject that contract, that the consumer should know about that as soon as possible to be able to mitigate the amount of bailment that they pay to where they can take back, say, hold on to the car, I don't wanna have to pay any additional bailment, but keep trying to find new finance, cause you still got 7 more days under the 10-day concept. Did I forget that?
Well, the other thing on the 3-day was, there's a perception out there because of a 3-day right of rescission on a lot of other products. And so by having 3 days in an agreement, that was part of the discussion that we had as a board. It automatically gives the consumer the idea that, I got 3 days, I can just bring the car back and I have no obligation, and that's not true.
I think, and let me just say one thing, and then Steve's had his hand up for a while, so Steve, next. One of the things that, this was the debate some time ago, and whether it's 3 days, 5 days, whatever, is that, here again, it's a minority, but we have dealers that have put people in vehicles and almost immediately know that they cannot get that deal done at that rate. So they take the entire 10 days, when they know after the 3rd or 4th day, they cannot get this done. They cannot. Nobody's gonna buy that. So they take the entire 10 days and they call them back in because they want to eat that bailment up. They want to eat that down payment up with the bailment. And that, I'm just telling you, John, that does happen.
And I've got that case sitting right now where my client put $4,200 down, and the deal was a $1,200 deal. Okay, and I know what the profit on it is, I got all the documents. Why would you sell a car for $1,200 if you could just let them drive in it for a month and charge them $42?
And so that was part of that discussion back then is, if a dealer knows that, when does a dealer know? They've got 10 days, but if they know on the 5th or 6th day, should they not be under some obligation to notify the consumer immediately on that? And the 3-day thing came up, and I don't disagree with you that that's confusing and maybe needs to be totally taken out, totally readdressed or whatever, but Mr. Perkins.
Well, a couple of things, and let's separate somebody who's got really sterling credit and a really great credit score, because they're approved in minutes. So typically, there's kind of 2 fashions of obtaining underwriting. There's what's called a shotgun approach, that a dealership sends an application to all 10 lenders, and they'll get all their 10 answers back. Some yes, some no, and all at different rates, right? Typically, this person who's bought this car wants to keep the car, and the dealer that sold the car wants to sell the car, assuming all the terms that are met. When you get into more difficult underwriting, a good finance manager won't do a shotgun approach, because you learn by denials, right? You may get the first denial from a lender, because you only sent it to one, and, so my next lender, I need to get a check stub or a proof of something, or a proof of something being paid, and submit that up front to the second lender, so that I can improve my chances of obtaining the underwriting for the terms of the retail installment contract. So, and you learn every time you go through that process, and hopefully you've garnered enough information after 2 or 3 denials that you've gathered enough information And assuming the consumer has responded quickly, that you now go to the fourth lender and they go, great, you provided me all this information, this is great, and I'll approve the deal. Banks work 7 days a week. Only in Colorado, the banks that underwrite dealers for the most part, they have buy centers 7 days a week. Only in Colorado are dealers closed on Sunday. Maybe there's a few other states that still are, but most states, car dealers are open 7 days a week, and so banks that are in the indirect lending business, they're doing, so there's no weekend delay typically with an approval process. You know, furthermore, the bank that denies that by law is required to send a denial letter to that consumer. So although the dealer may not have notified them upon the first denial, you know, oftentimes in these instances, the customer is calling because the bank has issued the denial letter and going, the bank says I'm turned down. Not to where, yes, that bank said you were turned down, but we have obtained the terms from another bank. So the 3 day and again, the 10 day is somewhat, but these more challenging deals when it comes to credit and underwriting, sometimes they do take a little more than 3 days if the finance office is working it that way, because the customer wants the car, the dealer wants to sell the car under the terms that they drove off in. And I think that's the goal, notwithstanding some dealer out there that wants to abuse the
But you
laws.
talked about the 5%.
We're talking, yeah.
You know, and it's
Yeah.
the 5% or 10% of the consumers, it's the 5% or whatever percent there is of new and used car dealers that may not be on the up and up. You know, you can manage by 90 or 95%. You can't manage an organization by 5%. And to penalize the world because of 5%, that's why we have boards and so on, to make sure that at some point, those people come in line or get rid of them. You know, I don't know dealers out there, I hear stories, I don't know dealers out there that deliberately are doing these things that
Well,
we
there
talk
are.
about.
There are.
I'm sure there are, I don't deny it, I don't know. You know, I mean, I don't know. You know, there's a lot of them that aren't dealers anymore because they couldn't stand the heat, and that's the way it should be.
Well, that coin has two sides, though. I mean, if you're saying it's only 5%, it's the minority that this whole bailment thing comes up with, then great, have dealers give up the bailment. It's not asking for a lot there,
Why should a dealer be, how about the
but
number?
it's only
How
5%.
about the consumers, that 5% or 10, whatever it is, that don't tell the truth? I know you've never had one of those, but believe me, there's a couple of them out there. I mean, it works both ways.
But
There are more
why the-
consumers, in my opinion, or my experience, are more consumers that give misinformation than there are dealers that give misinformation.
But what we're
I was
talking
on the
about here
floor.
really right
Buyers
now
are
is the
liars.
days.
I didn't
Notwithstanding
say-
some of the different positions, we're really talking about what are the days that we're focused on here it should be. And 3 days is maybe a little short for that difficult underwriting.
Mr. Perkins, I think when the board discussed this the last time, it's been a year and a half ago
Right,
now,
right.
and we moved forward. There was an effort, and I think some of the board members wanted this effort. I don't think there was a motion, if I recall right. I don't know that there was consensus, but some of the board members wanted, in this case, to err as much on the side of the consumer as possible. It's that consumer that in the 5 day, we absolutely know that we cannot get you this financing, so.
I don't know that that's, I disagree with that. If it's taking me some time to get some added information, so before I submit it back to the bank, I want to obtain proof of paid medical, proof of a paid collection, proof of something else, that I'm going to improve my chances to obtain the underwriting under the conditions. Yes, in a lot of instances, is 5 days it's gonna be done, absolutely, but I don't think that you can make a blanket statement that it's 5 days.
I agree with Steve.
All that I think what I was trying to say, probably didn't say, there was this effort that when a dealer knows that the deal is done,
Done.
that
Done.
there's an obligation almost immediately to let the consumer know that.
Absolutely.
And there have been dealers that have delayed that up till the last minute of the 10th day, because they their business plan, part of their business plan.
Is to collect bailment.
Is to collect bailment. And is it a small percentage? Yes, but it is the percent. Those are the people that keep us in business, keep this division in business, right there, on this issue. Now, I will tell you personally, just personally, I'm not sold on this 3-day, 5-day thing in this. I'm not sold. We could go back in and say the 10 days, and I'm perfectly comfortable with that. I'm gonna dig my heels in on a couple other areas, but personally, I'm not gonna dig my heels in on this issue. So,
I did just think for clarity, because I think there will be confusion, because there obviously was with us, if you don't have the same number in all the places. If we have 10 days in B, then maybe we should have 10 days in,
That's my point.
in this, and 10 days in the actual form. Is
Whatever,
that-
10 days has got to be.
Just so long as it's the same number everywhere?
Right, that's correct. Yeah, you can't have separate days, or, you talk about confusing or not understanding something. And where the confusion will get in our dealership people trying to explain to a customer, if it's 10, it's 10. Then it's simple.
And how are you gonna define reject, you get a counter? Is that a rejection? That's a counter.
And
Okay, guess what?
everything
Here's
says
what it
counter.
is. That's not a rejection, that's a counter, and then you take it back to the customer. So let's get away from rejection, let's leave it as 10 calendar days. And at the end of those 10 calendar days, you may rehash, you can do a form that says, hey, guess what? You are authorizing me to continue to negotiate beyond 10 days. You can keep the car, whatever it is.
You know, one more point about the 10-day rule. B does not say rejection, it says not approved. And that's an important distinction here. Because you may not be approved because the lender or the finance company has asked for more information from the consumer.
That's right.
And I advise dealers, at the end of 10 days, if you haven't gotten them approved, send that consumer an email or some sort of notice that they're not approved. Isn't the same thing as rejection. So 10-day rejection rule is gonna be a little bit different, but one we might be able to live with. And go ahead, Tammy had a point on the 3-day, it says any proposed lender too, so.
Yeah, no, and I think the point's partly already been made, and that is, to me, it just creates so much complication to have 2 different notification triggers. And instead of focusing on when does the deal totally fallen through, to what Bruce just said, you know, when have they truly tried all the lenders are really gonna try? And, you know, I mean, I could almost envision, but this gets complicated, right? You know, so many days after the final lender rejection, or 10 days, whichever is later. So maybe there's some way to accommodate the dealer that truly has exhausted all the possible lenders and is just waiting the extra 5 days, and that may or may not be worth drawing that line. But I mean, I understand what you're getting at there. I just think it's so much confusion to have 2 layers of notices
And that was
here
my
in
other
different
point.
days. And the other thing is, federal law has adverse action requirements. So, and dealers have to send their own because it doesn't meet their obligation if the lenders do it. So now we've got federal notifications of rejection along with this notice, and it just creates, I think, an extremely complicated environment.
I think it's just an undue burden on the dealers to try to keep track of different dates, like everybody, I think, agrees to.
And again, it's not an issue if there's not charging bailment with a retail installment contract. Take as long as you want. Knock yourself out. If it's not on someone else's dime, take 2 weeks, take 3 weeks, find a signee. My mortgage got sold a couple months ago. You know, I've been in the house 9, 10 years. You can always assign paper. You know, it doesn't matter, 3 days, 5 days, 10 days, as long as the consumer, the guy working at Home Depot, isn't paying $200 a day while you're out looking for, you know, someone to buy your paper. You can do whatever you want with it.
Yeah, except that gentleman had the chance to agree to it before he took the car though too, so. I mean, there's both sides that know what the ramifications are.
Do we have consensus on that the 3 days is not, not a good thing?
10 days,
Consensus
10
on
days
that?
is have a consistent number.
For the lack of argument, is 10 days okay on Yeah, I understand your,
Sure.
we have consensus on
Wait a
something.
minute, you don't, because if you put 10 days after the initial decision, then you're contrary to the 10 days from the date you sign the
It
contract.
says 10 days from contract date.
Yeah, but what I'm saying, D1 talks about the initial determination or rejection. So if you put 10 days in there, you get the rejection 2 days after you sign the contract, then you're at 12 days,
But that's,
which means you just have to take out the initial decision comment at
Just
all.
take out the number two, D2.
Take it out completely.
But, yeah,
Yeah,
and
and don't have
D1
two.
make it be 10, and then just take out D2?
No, have no initial notification at all.
Yeah, that would be leaving number 1 and making it 10 days and taking out number 2, because number 2 is where you're talking about initial. There's
You just
no,
take number 1 out.
there's no initial at the beginning.
Yeah, take,
The current disclosure requires 10 calendar days of the date that you sign the retail.
and
That's all this
that's
help.
what you would want to say everywhere.
right,
Yes,
right.
I
Right,
think.
and I think we can change that.
Just to give her,
Okay,
because
that's
that's the
one.
initial. Okay, so we're gonna move this 10.
I got a problem with that whole scheme too, but I don't care about the 3 or 10 days.
I do, I actually have a question now. I don't know if this is the right time to bring this question, but it's what Mr. Dahmer was just pointing out. And that is B says a dealer shall give notice of rejection of financing of proposed buyer within 10 days from the date of the purchase, order, or agreement on a financing or consignment sale. And I believe Mr. Dahmer is correct, that the word is rejection in the regulation, and I think that it can be argued that not approved is maybe a slightly different concept.
Well, in B, I think they were, because I was around when the board did B, I think Mr. Perkins was too. They were conforming it to the statute, because it says, must notify of the acceptance or rejection of financing. In the statute, it says that, for Clause 183B. So they were using the same verbiage in their regulation when we promulgated that regulation.
I'd have to really think about that for a while to see if, under Mr. Dahmer, if Mr. Dahmer is going to make that argument at some point in time in the future, that rejection and not approved is different. If it is fixable at this point, I mean, V's on the table. V is on, the regulation V is on the table, is it? And I think at one point in time, we didn't necessarily think that V needed to be manipulated. I just don't know if what you just said changes that, I don't know. And then what Ms. Rouse points out is if you say rejection and/or not approved, or put not approved in the place of rejection, then does it fit, is it gonna fit under the OLLS AG that you are defining a statute a little differently?
Well, we've seen
Well,
that
just
happen
to-
in material
but it also
particulars,
goes
and I
on-
don't wanna get in that same
But it
dilemma where there's different verbiage used in the regulation than there is in the statute, because then, of course, every judge says, well, they meant it to be different.
Well, it also goes on to say acceptance or rejection of a motor vehicle purchase order agreement.
Purchase order or agreement. Or agreement. Yes.
Purchase order agreement.
That's a verbiage.
There's an or in there. I don't know if that changes anything. Purchase order or agreement on a finance or consignment sale.
Yeah, or change.
Changes a lot of
Yeah.
things.
Oh, I don't have that. Sorry, I didn't bring that language with me.
So maybe after the break, we can discuss that a little after Rick thinks a little bit.
Or agreement though, but the agreement refers
not a
more to
core.
an overall transaction, not one lender's acceptance or rejection.
There is.
It's the deal, that's all. That's the transaction. Earlier in V, it talks about the rejection of a motor vehicle purchase order agreement. It goes on to talk about a finance sale or a consignment sale, that a consignment sale would also fit in there.
Are you looking at the statute or are you looking at the regulations?
No, we're looking at the
statute, you're looking at the reg. They're different.
And yeah, they're good, that's the problem.
Let's vote on it.
Which is all.
Sounds like two attorneys.
Yeah.
Imagine. Yeah, you're looking at the statute and it doesn't have the word "or" in it, the regulation has the word "or" in it.
So Bruce, I guess the answer to your question is, let's suppose on day 8, dealer here was back from finance company that, hey, we can't approve this guy unless you can provide us with proof of employment and the fact that he's current on his mortgage. Dealer calls consumer that day and says, hey, I can't get you bought at that rate unless you provide these following things. Do we want the consumer to stay in that car while this dance continues, or do we not want the consumer to stay in that car? Do we want the dance to be over, the consumer to bring the car back, and the whole deal to be done? I think that's the big question here on this, rejection versus not approval language.
Well,
And what you just, the example you just gave isn't necessarily a rejection.
Right.
That it isn't approved under.
The dance goes on.
Right.
Right.
Well, I guess my point on that would be that the parties agree that the dance continues,
Right, they should
right?
agree.
So there's a
But the
disclosure
consumer can't agree
and.
because now he's out $800 or
That's-
$1,600.
But that's the
right.
purpose of the initial disclosure, to make sure it's very clear up front that usage charges apply and this isn't a done deal.
And this isn't,
Again,
this
okay,
happened to Mike, it happened to me. You get this thing at the end of you're sitting at the dealership for 5, 6, 7, 8 hours. The only thing standing between you and getting home and getting a beer and a cheeseburger is you sign this damn thing. And the guy's saying, oh yeah, we got you done, we got you done, we got you done, don't worry about it. Yeah, fuck it, I'll sign it, I'll sign anything, whatever. Let me get out of
well
here.
then what is the purpose of having a written contract in the first place?
Well, that's a good question. What is the purpose of a retail installment sales contract? That is financing. That obligates the consumer. That is consummation. So if you want a consumer to be obligated, then you sign a risk. If you don't want the consumer to be obligated,
And again,
you sign a
no,
buyer's
we're
order.
not
May I
gonna-
finish? You sign a buyer's order and a disclosure.
And again, we have fundamentally different views about that process and what's allowable and what's not. So at the end of the day, the contractual language has to mean something. The purpose of an added disclosure document is to have one more piece of paper to make it really clear that these are really important things you may not have read in your contract, but we're gonna put them in one more place just to make it extra sure that you read it. And there's only so much you can do to make sure people read their contracts and disclosures. I mean, we can't make sure they even read this disclosure.
You're right, and the fundamental problem is if you have a document that says you're not financed, such as this disclosure document, and you have a document that says you are financed, like a retail installment sales contract, that is a title violation.
Again, we have a different opinion
But
on that.
Rick, the reason we put the retail installment contract can be canceled if financial, because we want it, when it comes to Matt, I want it to be able to, Matt say, hey, you sign this disclosure. And it says specifically, your retail installment contract says it may be canceled if it can't be assigned to a third-party lender. Would you agree with me that that is at least another layer for them to know you're not approved, that it is subject to certain other conditions?
No, I would say you have financing that has a condition subsequent on it. Okay? Now, the entire reason for this bailment, the entire wellspring where this comes from, is this disclosure document. So I say, if you enter into a retail installment sales contract that has a seller's right to cancel, and I'm not saying you can't have a retail installment sales contract without a seller's right to
You
cancel.
just have the problem with bailment.
I have a problem with the bailment. Yeah, I mean, once you have that, financing has been approved. Now, it's been approved with a condition subsequent, that if I can't sell it to a third party, I might unwind this deal. And you got 10 days to do that. That's great, I'm cool with that. But you can't have it both ways, where you have this document that says you're not approved, and then you've got a retail installment contract that says you are approved, subject to some condition. And that's the only thing I'm saying. If you want to contract people and have a seller's right to cancel, knock yourself out. You just don't get bailment. You want the potential for bailment, put them on a buyer's order, send them out, shop the contract as much as you want.
That argument can go to the legislature, because the legislature already said you can charge bailment, right?
I think, I'm gonna take, because I promised when I first started these meetings, we'd take a break at the top of the hour. I think I just want to state what, I know we're getting into these legal arguments, and I think I'm gonna go back to the division's position on this thing of bailment. It's been our position for a long time. We have never taken the position ever that a dealer can't charge bailment, never, nor would we. Our position is, if you put $2,000 down and the deal falls through and you bring the vehicle back, you have to refund the $2,000. How you get the bailment from the consumer, that's between the dealer and the consumer, probably at a civil level, that they cannot offset that down
Can you
payment.
explain the
Because
order
six-
that?
Yeah,
What is the
61708.
But that's only
If
if they guaranteed it
financing
when
is
they should have.
guaranteed.
Finance contract is a guarantee
So
of finance.
so that's back to your position, just to be clear
Yeah.
though. Your
That's
position
your
though,
position.
if I could just make sure we understand it. So your position is that the process of spot delivery and signing a contract leads to a good faith belief. Is that the
Absolutely.
basis for why you,
Absolutely.
okay. And I understand that, and we have a difference of opinion, but that makes,
I'm gonna go
that
back
makes
and
sense,
put
right, okay.
Mr. Shinden's percentages in there.
Right.
90% of the people that walk out that door with those keys to the car, 90% think it's a done deal. You give me statistics that proves that that isn't it, because that's the way it is. 90% think it is.
And they are. And they are.
Okay?
In fact, some of them, I know it's hard to believe, we do better job on the rate than what they had planned on. And the consumer gets the benefit of that. So we say, we're gonna get you financed at 8%, and it comes in at 6%, whatever, the consumer gets benefit of that. So it's not a one, the thing that gets me about this discussion is it seems like it's a one-way street, that poor consumer just being beat to a pulp. That's not true in the vast majority of deals. It's not true. And I think we, as the people that are trying to put this together, I guarantee it's not true in Steve's store, I guarantee it wasn't true in my store, and I guarantee it's not true in the majority of the stores. That the consumer, number one, you're gonna be getting a survey back, and that's important, that determines how well you're gonna do. And a lot of other things, in a lot of cases today, manufacturers are giving economic reasons for the dealer to make sure they treat that customer well because it helps pay for facilities and everything else. We all know that. So the fact that we are abusing these customers, and I'm not saying that it doesn't happen in a small minority group, then it's a responsibility of whoever's in charge to make sure they take care of that group, not penalize every other dealer for trying to do a good job. And that's my contention.
Well, I understand that, John, but aren't 100% of the laws written for the small majority of the people?
Absolutely.
That's what we're talking about. If we didn't have laws and we didn't have there'd be no reason for us to be sitting here. There'd be no reason for the division.
But you can't penalize the whole group for a small group, is my contention.
Well, how are you penalizing a dealer when you say that you cannot offset the down payment with bailment?
Because it protects,
They'll never get it.
it protects him on getting the cost. Our bailment issue was the only time we ever charged bailment, which was a very rare occasion, is when the customer deliberately lied to us, deliberately hid the vehicle, that's when we would go for the bailment. Other than that, we didn't do that.
And that's where I think our position is in those situations, you have the right to bailment, absolute, 100% right to bailment.
And the offset, but to have to go civilly after the bailment, that's nuts. When you've got a down payment, and you've got it consistent.
Would you like their TV?
The division,
Your family
the division
jewelry?
and the board has allowed for that through statute and regulation for as long as I've been in.
I don't think that's true, Steve. I don't think we've ever allowed for that. It's been we get complaints on this issue. Well, we haven't had a lot of complaints in the last year on this issue. We get complaints, we've never allowed it. Allow it means that
But it's
We've opened
been,
cases.
but
He has defended those people.
I understand, but I would then suggest that your resolution isn't through rulemaking here, that your resolution is through legislative change. Because it has gone on, whether you want to call it a deposit or cash down, and how do we get from that to availment, that has gone on in this industry for 30 years. And if you're trying to, which I'm all about protecting the consumer, if you're trying to make that change, to me, it has to come legislatively first to put a bright light or line on that statute.
It is in statute already.
It is, it's in the rule now.
I agree.
The rule now says that the dealer can charge the down payment for bailment.
Right.
Which is in which
Well-
in our opinion is.
In your opinion.
Yeah, but let's be clear here. I'm sorry.
Okay,
And I appreciate that.
It
so,
talks about if the sale is not consummated.
But then you're going against legislative services and rulemaking and AG's offices for 25 years, 30 years.
that's my job, Steve. That's part of my job. That's why I'm here.
Because isn't
So
there
then change it
precedence?
legislatively.
Well, I'm not opposed to that. You know how difficult that is?
I do, yes, unfortunately, I do.
I mean, that's why we have this thing called rulemaking, okay?
Right.
Because if we could change everything legislatively, there would be, if we could change everything legislatively,
I
there would be
understand.
no need for one rule.
Now, I understand the challenge with,
But
I do not
But
disagree with you.
isn't there a two-part thing that's important here? Number one, protect the consumer, all for it, but you also gotta protect the dealer organization.
Yes. We call it balance.
That's right. And I think we do a pretty good job of that.
I agree.
So, and I
I
think
can
the
just
system
talk-
has worked very well, like Steve says, 30 years I've been around, it's worked. And
If that's what this group wants to do, if this group wants to make no change to this, I gotta tell you, I'm okay with that. I really am. I'm okay with that. We'll just go to the board and say, the focus group said no change. We're putting it in your lap. What do you wanna do? I'm kind of okay with that.
and I don't think that's what the focus group wants.
I wanna know what Matt thinks as far as the standpoint of, I keep on coming back to one thing. If we put something in this disclosure that says, by the way, it's not guaranteed, it's conditioned, contingent, whatever it is, doesn't that get you around 61708? It says that is a written document that says you're guaranteed because you raise a belief. Here, there can't be a belief because the customer signed it saying, I know it's not guaranteed, I know it's not. So then can't you keep the down payment from here? Because now you said, clearly it's not guaranteed. They signed off on it. So you now can charge the bailment and keep the down payment because it's not in conflict with 61708. Is that kind of what?
You remove in my opinion, when you put this delivery verbiage in here, that, yes, you remove this, I'm pretty confident that I was finance when I walked out. We can go back and say, well, wait a minute, you signed F here, talking about delivery, and that this does not mean that you're guaranteed, and you're taking this understanding, you walk out of here and maybe pay usage fees if this doesn't happen.
And Rick can go sue and do whatever he wants. and
This is
you're
one
okay.
thing that I will go back and agree with Tammy on, because she goes back to this every time, is the guarantee is the whole issue here. And if we can show in an investigation, the reasonable person, the reasonable belief that I was approved for financing and it was guaranteed, that's where this conflict comes in.
Right.
If they sign something saying, I know I am not guaranteed until this happens, that removes the conflict that we have from enforcement.
put it in.
Put it in.
That's why we.
I think why you did a good job of
Wait a second,
putting.
weren't we just saying we gotta legislatively do this? We don't wanna go through rulemaking, but now it's, let's use rulemaking to just void a statute? A consumer
No,
protection
what it's
statute?
doing, it's taking 61708 and giving it context through a document that says it's not guaranteed.
Yeah, it's an
Dealing
end
with
run-
the
it's an
subjective
end run around the
differences of
statute.
opinion of what guarantee means, and that's what rulemaking is supposed to do.
No,
We come back to all of these
findings
same
of facts.
arguments every single time that we're in here. But what we're trying to do is get to this confusion point of, well, we're saying, we think we're guaranteed, but the dealer's saying we're not. Well, let's put it in writing. Is that what we talked about?
Can we not use this form to do that?
Yes, that's what.
That's why it is, why you took combination of his and ours and put it in here.
That's what this current draft is that proposal.
You don't take out the bailment right, you just put in that it's not guaranteed.
Yeah.
We said that day meeting one.
Did everybody
That's what
read
the
this
form is
proposal?
right now. That's what that proposal is.
That's exactly what it says.
It is, and it is actually a combination of between what Mr. Wyken did and what Mr. McKinnon or Mr. O'Connell did.
Here's the fundamental problem with that.
And you had that in yours.
The statute doesn't allow the board to make a document that modifies a retail installment sales contract. It's specifically excluded. They cannot do it. To prescribe a form or forms to be used as part of a contract for sale of a motor vehicle by any motor vehicle dealer or motor vehicle salesperson other than a retail installment sales contract. Can't do it, ultra virus. That's why I got this to begin with.
But Rick, it's not, what it's doing, it is saying, it's, okay, again, we're incorporating this into your buyer's order, okay? It's in no way changing your retail installment contract. Your retail installment contract is set separate. I agree with your condition subsequent, you go ahead and cancel, great. All this is doing is going into your buyer's order saying, look, we're now gonna go ahead and give the dealers the ability to get away, or give the division, really, the ability to figure out,
Right.
this is not guaranteed financing, because we have all these documents to say it's not guaranteed financing. And I get your point, I understand where you're coming from a legal perspective, but I look at it differently and say, all we're doing is we're cleaning up a buyer's order and making it comport to the statute, so that there is no guaranteed
You're
financing.
not going to comport to the statute. What you're doing is an end run around the statute by putting a finding of fact, which is the job for a jury or a judge, into this regulation. And I guarantee you that I will not, I mean, we're gonna be in litigation on this one with the board. I will sue on that one all day long.
And you know what, if that's what you wanna do, that's what you wanna do, but again, the question becomes is, under 61708, does the division, and I understand the civil part, does the division now look and say, hey, there can't be a reasonable belief by a consumer that there was guaranteed financing, because you initially saying, these are all things that make it not guaranteed.
The division isn't a fact finder. They can promulgate rules. What you're saying is they get to make findings of fact.
No, the division can't promulgate rules.
But the division does make some factual, has to make a preliminary fact finding in order to take something to the
What's the
board of
jury
probable
instruction
cause.
look like that on Mike?
On what? I'm here because I want to figure out, how do we get away from my dealers getting caught up in the deal licensing board machine?
And I mean, I think what I sent out was real clear. If you got a risk, no bailment. If you want to spot deliver a car and go shop for whatever, you do it on the disclosure form and a buyer's order. That's a nice, clear, bright line rule. And it fits with the statute that we already have. Because it exempts retail installment sales contracts by, 318K1. I mean, it fits into that. If you look at the instructions for the disclosure form we have now, it fits into that. This is what I believe was originally intended. And somehow, this retail installment thing has kind of stepped in there. It fits with TILA, it fits with basically everything we got. But the dealers just want to finance their finance department off the backs of people.
Oh, that's bullshit.
That's not bullshit. It's exactly what you're doing.
It's
And
absolutely.
Then give it up.
So you think it could?
Give it up. It doesn't happen to anyone. It doesn't happen to anyone. Give it up.
I didn't
What's it
say
gonna
didn't
cost you?
happen. It happens periodically that we charge bailment, periodically. It wasn't once a month.
Then what are you giving up? Another week in Italy?
John, I think, here again, I think we have to
Again,
separate.
that was the way I ran it. There's some people that don't charge at all.
I've never tried.
Okay, so, but the dealers that want that right, we have the legal right and everything else, why shouldn't they have that right? If the
Because the right gets
consumer,
abused.
if the consumer was not truthful, and I know you find it hard to believe, every now and then one lie, that dealer should be protected and be able to get that money and close the door. That's what they should have, and that's exactly what we have in legally, and there's no reason that shouldn't continue.
No, the dealership should bear the risk. If you pull someone's credit report, you pull credit reports every car deal, right? You know if the guy's at 800. Okay, he's gonna be an automatic delivery, boom,
It's
spot him
not-
out.
it's 800
If he's a
not
650, and I've seen car deals, 600 and lower, that they're spot delivering. These aren't car deals. I've seen car deals where they're rolling negative equity, $5,000 negative equity into a car deal on someone with a 620 credit score. They're not car deals. I know they're not car deals, and I'm not a finance manager. All right? You got guys doing this every day.
I can't speak.
Time for a break.
One more
10 minutes.
point in response to Mr. Wincoop. His reading of K1 is different than mine and other attorneys I've talked to about it. K1 says you can roll these disclosures into another form, which is what Mr. McKinnon does with some of his clients, other than a retail installment sale contract. You can't roll them into the retail installment sale contract. That would create all sorts of problems in doing that because retail installment sale contracts are generally used in multiple states, et cetera. So that's how I read K1. I read it different than Mr. Wincoop. It doesn't tell me that I can't use the 2434 in conjunction with a retail installment sale contract. So I just wanted to make that point before the break, sorry.
When we impaneled this group, when we went through the last group, the division had concerns that the current disclosure form should not be a rule, number one, should be unembedded.
Right.
And that E, mostly E, had some language that was problematic,
Right.
all the way through E. And there was problems with E conflicting, or at least on appearance conflicting with 61708. So what our goal here is to unembed the form and clean up the language of E or D or E if we go forward with the form. That's our goal. That's the division's goal. And what the board does with this, don't know, but that's the division's goal, and try to get some degree of consensus to at least do that. We'll never agree on this coalition, I understand that.
And the statute already gives you the power to unembed the form, as long as you do it in 8-point type and with initials next to it. I mean, the statute's already very clear on that point, I think, so I don't know that we really need any rulemaking on that. I think that's been done by the legislature. Just a question of what the form's gonna say and what the rulemaking says to clarify what the rules of the road are for spot delivery.
10-minute break.
Hi, how are you?
Okay, we're back on the record. Where do we go from here? So, what has happened, and I guess I knew about this, but Ms. Rouse did a little research during the break, and I think we need to go back in history a little bit to
But I keep pointing to you and that's.
what it was, and what Sunset did, and what Sunset didn't do, and what happened to some language that was there before. I'll turn it over to Ms. Rouse.
Yeah, some of the discussion that we had earlier made me think, because it was something that Mr. Perkins said, that yes, that used to be there. And it magically disappeared. So I went and got my old regulations from when I first started, and I was comparing them to what's currently on the Secretary of State at this very moment. Okay? And the change that occurred happened in 2007 with Sunset. Because in Sunset, they said, you need to put how to get a hold of the division. You need to notify the consumers how to get a hold of the division. So the board undertook rulemaking and changed the regulation of 12.6.1043K. The one that is currently on the Secretary of State's website, regulation 12.6.1043K, is the form and only the form. Okay? Prior to that, this is what was in there, and it's gonna probably bolster something that you said, and it's gonna bolster something that you said, so this could get interesting. So the things that magically disappeared, and I don't know how they magically disappeared because there really doesn't seem to be record there, I don't know if it just didn't get uploaded, is,
No, I have all the record of that. It wasn't in the draft.
I know!
It wasn't in the draft.
I know, it just went away. Here's what was in prior to sunset on regulation 12.6.104. In addition to the actual form, there was a number 1 that said disclosures in the following language in order and sequence must be used in all contracts for the sale of any motor vehicle unless excluded by these regulations. And then it has the form. Then it has number 2, whoops, it's at the bottom of this form, sorry, I looked at my page too soon. Then it has number 2, which is, these disclosures may be included in a written contract and may be in a form which is incorporated by reference in a written contract, which I believe one of Mr. McKinnon's clients does to this very day. Then number 3, the language which appears in paragraphs A, B, C, D, and E of the required disclosures above must appear in 12-point boldface type or at least 3 points larger than the smallest type appearing on the contract form. Number 4, a copy of all disclosures must be given to the purchaser at the time of consummation of the sale. Number 5, the following transactions are excluded from the application of this regulation: sales between dealers and wholesalers, sales in which a retail installment sales contract with all disclosures required by law has been executed at the time the purchaser becomes contractually obligated to purchase the vehicle. And number 6, when a purchase order or agreement is subject to dealer acceptance, in quotation marks, the order or agreement shall state this in a conspicuous manner. That stuff all magically went away, and
It was left out of the rule draft. I mean, I actually made the point at that meeting, but.
so,
So we weren't,
I know
So
you
is this
guys-
where I go woo-hoo and do my little pony ride thing?
so, it's part of what you said, and it may be part of what you said, and now I think we have some more things to consider.
So since it's not there, is it not part of,
This went away, it's no longer the rule,
The rule, but it could be added
But-
back in,
but we may not have to reinvent the wheel.
Because
We
it's
may be able to
because it's
just add that back?
maybe resurrect some of this, part of this, I don't know.
Here's your levitation dance.
So here's, it was interesting, because last time Mary Marvin made the point, and I mean, going back to your legal arguments on the statute, and this was a point I made in the first hearing on this, was I still don't know what the statute means. The part that excludes the retail, or, the retail installment sales contract. And, Mary Marvin talked about, when this all first arose, there was not a standardized retail installment sales contract. So you had people making deals, and it wasn't really committed to writing, and the financing wasn't well articulated in a contract. And so that was a different time when there wasn't standardized retail installment sales contract. So, when I first looked at the statute, I thought, well, maybe it means cases other than a retail installment sales contract where there's not a contract to lay all this out. And in those cases, there's a need for a separate disclosure to make sure it is in writing when there's not a detailed retail installment sales contract. Again, just another potential interpretation for that underlying statute, but it kind of lined up with her history that we didn't used to have standardized retail installment sales contracts. So, and again, I guess we can sit around and debate what did the legislature intend at the time and what does that language mean. At a certain point, there just has to be a decision about what it means and move forward and deal with. But that is one interpretation that seems to line up and make sense of that language. But if that's the case, then that would mean there's potentially not a need for a separate disclosure form when the installment contract outlines all of these contingencies and issues. I don't know that that's a good thing, because I think what we're talking about is a disclosure form that makes certain things more clear than they would be if they were buried in a detailed contract that has many, many, many other provisions. You raised some very valid.
Mr. McKinnon, history on this, do you recall?
As I remember, it was, and a little bit along Mary's, but it was, dealers wanted to be able to charge bailment, and how do we do that without incorporating this into the retail installment contract? So it was come up with either you put it in your buyer's order, or we come up with a form like this that's incorporated into your buyer's order that allows dealers then to go ahead and whether you want to go ahead and say that.
Say it,
conditions.
say it, come on.
that if basically financing is not approved, then this gives notice to them, and you can charge the bailment based upon your buyer's order surviving the fact that there's no longer a retail installment contract that's been approved. That's my recollection through Mary, through even Jim Clark, how this came about.
And this superseded Jim Clark.
Oh, yeah, but Ed, remember, I think Jim Clark had his own kind of stuff about it too, so.
When I recall in the last discussion, or in one of the dealer board discussions on this, there were a couple of the use members who pointed out that in the typical scenario that we see with new dealers, for the most part, you're always getting a retail installment sales contract. When you have buy here, pay here, or there is more of the dealer that's more functioning as a direct lender on a consistent basis, they may not have that retail installment. So some of these transactions don't have a corresponding retail installment sales contract, which isn't really in our field of, what we're looking at here, but I know in some of the drafts, it refers specifically to the retail installment sales contract, but there may or may not be one. Based on what
Mr.
other
Perkins,
board members have said.
history along those lines?
I can't speak to why those rules and regs would have been eliminated.
I don't know that it was intentional.
It wasn't
Well,
intentional,
but
because
I
I
don't-
remember distinctly making
Was it
the
on the
point that
paper?
there
Would
was
it have come out-
language in it, I think it was just overlooked. It was just overlooked.
I don't think
But it would
was
have come out of Dora when they were going through all that they.
No,
do?
it went through this board. There was a hearing, they went through this board. It was just, I think, overlooked that there was language in the rule that
Right,
got
but-
left out
but
that
was it-
allowed you to put it in.
Okay, so you think it was an oversight versus Dora's recommendations that it'd be taken out?
Yeah.
Tammy, do you think that, and the division may have to own this. I mean, the old division may have to own this, because the new division makes mistakes too. Is it a possibility that it was discussed and the language was supposed to continue to stay in there, and when it was uploaded, it just wasn't drafted correctly for the upload at the Secretary of State's office?
No, because I can go back and pull my notes, I know I have them somewhere, but I distinctly remember realizing it and bringing it up. And everyone looked at me like I was crazy at the time.
No,
but-
I didn't.
God, before your time on the board, I don't recall for sure. And, I'd only been here a couple of years at that point, but, I think it just got overlooked when the rule was revamped. And I don't think that there's that many dealers I think most every dealer uses this separate form. There aren't that many that put these provisions into their other contracts. So I don't think it was
I
that
don't know
pervasive.
Your client.
I mean, I know you do, but
That's the only one I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
And
it's
then
not common at
And it's a
all,
big one.
so.
Well, and then that was, we had to sit down and, go through and say, look, guys, put to the division, this is what it says, this is what we think we can do. And there was a couple times we had to go ahead and prove, try to prove what we thought was the way to do it.
Yeah, I think you came in and
We
spoke
came in
with
twice,
Mr.
actually,
Sexton
with
one
Bob
time.
Sexton, and I think we sat down with you guys one
I
time,
do recall that.
so.
All right,
But
so-
the statute says that if the board prescribes a disclosure form, that disclosure form is mandatory. I mean, it's right there in the statute. So either you have a disclosure form or you don't have a disclosure form. But if you have this form, it has to be used in every single sale. So it's not that, if you want to incorporate it into some other document, that's fine. You still got to fill out the form.
See, I disagree. I think it says basically incorporate these provisions into the form, into the contract.
The statute itself says that, well, let me read out of the statute book instead of out of this book, because that's just. At 3K1 says to prescribe a form or form to be used. That means they're authorized to do that. But when you go down to 2, right after you go through A, B, C, D, when you get to 2, the information required in paragraph 1 of this paragraph 3 shall be read and initialed by both parties. Oh, I'm sorry, it's 3. The use of the contract form prescribed in subparagraph 1 in this paragraph K shall be mandatory for the sale of any motor vehicle.
Go back though, I think, if you look at, and I didn't, because the way, well, okay, let's even, and I don't, the regulation came back and interpreted the statute, and the regulation now says, guess what, you can go ahead and use either in the, you can put it in the contract, or you can go ahead and use the form,
So
so.
Mike, I think what Chris is saying is that it
That went
doesn't
away
say that anymore.
now.
Yeah,
That went away.
it's not in-
You're
it's
talking
not
about
in
the
the-
exclusion in the reg.
Right,
Right,
Yeah.
under, 2.
Which back before
Disclosures may be
2007
included in a form.
was there.
That part, that reg doesn't exist anymore.
It's not.
That's what
I got,
Chris is
I'll
saying.
look at the statute part, 'cause as I remember, I thought the statute part even started from the very beginning saying that
Prescribed in all forms,
to describe a form of forms, but it doesn't. I'll go back and take a look, because I remember, I think even after 2007, we sat down with it and looked at it, so.
Here's one of the things that happened at the division level for quite a while, even since I've been here, is the statute on our website. The statutes and the regs weren't updated in a timely manner. So there was times that we would, I think there was one time, about the time I arrived 7 years ago, there was an update that was there for quite a long period of time, but when Mr. Beebe did some research several years later, 3 or 4 years ago, realized that there was some things on our website that didn't match currently what it's the Secretary of State's office or currently under statute. So then there was a rewrite of that, and that stayed out there for a few years until now, just recently, we went and did a total download of the Secretary of State's and a total download of the statutory scheme. And everybody's not happy with us because we've separated them, and I get all of that. There'll be a day that we can maybe bring those back together in some form, but currently, we're comfortable that what is on our website is accurate. Where I would say a year ago, and especially 5 years ago, wouldn't say that what's on our website was accurate. We're just wondering how this language got dropped off, and I just don't know.
And I think it was just the rulemaking. I think it just got left out of the rulemaking. Because,
Was the intent to, was there a conscientious intent to drop it, or it was just an assumption that it was gonna be there? We were more concerned about this form than those other things after the form.
my recollection is, it wasn't an intent at all, and I don't think anyone realized that there was language being dropped, and again,
Well, I would assume that if the board didn't, on the record through rulemaking, say, we're deleting this, then it's still part of the regulation, even though it may not appear. How can it not be if the board didn't take any action to?
because it was formally promulgated and adopted, so.
That's why
It
they
was
pulled the
adopted
official
by-
CCR of the Secretary of State, that they're the ones.
So you're saying if the
Have that,
board,
and it's not there.
if the board didn't approve a language change, then it still is in effect, it's not in effect? How could
We
the board?
didn't approve
how
the
could the-
language change because it was omitted, so therefore we approved it.
They didn't realize.
When it
the
came, when it came back through Fedora though?
They approved it.
You approved the whole bulk.
You approved
Right,
the-
not
the
realizing
approval
that
as
there
it
was-
was up.
Okay, all right.
So let's,
But I guess really, the key question is, so we realize it happened, like, kind of what should it be going forward, right? Is really what should it be going forward is really the question we're here to.
well, it would seem
focus
like
on,
with,
right?
not that we'll ever get to consensus on this, but it would seem like if some of that language was added back into what Ms. Scott has redrafted as a proposed regulation, that would solve some problems.
That's my main position, is the word contract isn't defined as precisely as it needs to be. There's many documents in there that they're calling contracts, kind of willy-nilly. This is a contract now, this is a contract then. It's just, we gotta distinguish a retail installment sales contract, because it's sacrosanct.
I mean, to me, there's a threshold question about whether the reg should allow for these disclosures, which the board and everybody thinks are so important, whether they should be allowed to be buried in the larger contracts or not. I mean, to me, that's a fundamental policy question that the board needs to answer. And it was in the prior version of the reg and it got dropped, but I mean, I think it's a fundamental question. If we think they're that important and people are overlooking them, should the new reg allow them to be in other contracts or not?
Actually, Mr. Chairman, I think it's a legal question, not a board question, quite frankly.
How so?
I think it either is allowed or it's not. It's required or it's not. The board doesn't get to make that call.
Well, the language that we're talking about was in a prior regulation, so, I mean, yeah, if you think the statute doesn't give the leeway, then you're right. I mean, that would be a legal question.
And I'm not saying which side of
Yeah.
the question, I don't know the answer to that question.
So that, you're right,
I'm
that
not
would
saying
be,
the
that would be
answer.
the first question. If there is leeway, then it would be a policy question. Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah, if it's ambiguous, if a court
Yeah.
determined it was ambiguous, then the board gets to make the call, but
Right.
if it's clear, then the board is not.
So you're saying that
So how do we
there
get-
has to
do we
be
get-
the form may not need to be embedded, but a separate form needs to be done versus putting it in part of a purchase agreement. Is that what you're?
Well, I think that's the question.
The question.
I think, yeah. I think at some point, somebody said, no, you can't do that. And YE, and I tend to agree with YE, that the Supreme Court is the arbiter. But the way I read the statute, it is required to be a separate form.
Well, actually,
I brought the statute and K1A, large case, clearly says you can put it in a separate contract. That statute is not going away.
Where do you see that?
Again,
What
that's
language
why
is
the
that?
Supreme Court decides, I think we may have yet another.
In 12.6.104.3, K1.
K1, large case A.
The one that started at 12-point boldface?
Yeah,
In a contract.
category size, at least 3 points larger than the smallest type appearing in the contract, small case. An instruction that the form is a legal instrument, blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, I've always read that to say, yeah, you don't need a separate form if you make all these disclosures in your purchase agreement. That's how I've always read that.
And my understanding, kind of from what the historically was, if dealers didn't want to change their buyer's order, then that was the purpose of this, to incorporate it into their buyer's order, because it says by initialing this goes into your contract. That was the intent. If you don't want to change your buyer's order, put that in there, then we've got a form that the board has gone ahead and put out that now goes into your buyer's order.
It goes into the buyer's order, not the.
It'll never go in the retail installment contract, can't ever go in there,
Yes.
right?
Okay,
And that's the part that is in
Right.
the statute.
yeah,
Right.
or the purchase order, whatever you want to call it.
Right, and that's why when we sent it to you, we want to clarify, we've got, some people call it purchase agreement, some people buyer's order, but then we know that there's a retail installment contract, which is completely separate.
So your point is, because the statute says point size in relation to other language in the contract, that is statutory language that indicates that it doesn't even need to be in a rule, that it can be in a contract versus a separate form? Is that
Yes,
what you're saying?
that's how I interpret it.
Okay.
And that's why they-
For K1A.
So I see, what- I see.
And
what
see,
you're
I
saying.
interpret it as that if the board does not prescribe a form, then this applies. But once the board prescribes a form for these disclosures, you have to use the board's form. That's the way I interpret that.
Yeah, I would have to respectfully disagree.
Okay.
But that was the whole purpose, was because it said, the old form says, by initialing these, this incorporates them into your contract to purchase it. That was, again, from my historical perspective, the convenience for dealers not to have to change their entire buyer's order, and this just brings you back into it, so.
Okay, Coach?
This is me thinking, it doesn't happen very often. It's happening right now, so it may take a minute here. I think that this revelation of something I sort of knew was there but didn't realize its significance until right now needs some time for everybody in this room to chew on a little bit. I did not want to bring everybody back for a fourth meeting. But I think maybe there may be a need for that to happen.
Well, I don't know that that's the case. You could certainly propose that to the board, unless it needs to come out of here before the board visits it.
The board, right today, Steve, right today, under this new rulemaking,
Yeah.
the board has nothing to say about this.
Okay.
Until the board has total, everything that's
Once we have
on the end.
Right.
Okay.
Is it, if I understand it correctly, is there something that says that was removed or you would think it could have been on a page break and never got loaded up? I mean, do we think it's accidental more than?
In the 10 minutes I had to look at it, I would say it was an oversight.
So it was accidental, it wasn't deliberate?
That's just me looking, that's not me listening to.
No.
I think it's a very good question, because then ask this question, or I would ask you this question in return is, if it was intentional, what was the purpose of it? I mean, what did it solve?
Right.
What did removing that language, Steve says it missed the test of time for all this time, until recently, is what I'm saying, and recently maybe when it was taken out. Unintentionally taken out. What, if there was an intent to take that language out, what did that solve or accomplish?
Where's the written word that says this is why we're removing it?
And
Again, I'm just telling you, I was there, it wasn't a conscious discussion.
Was
It just
anything-
wasn't a
So if
conscious
it was
discussion
accidental,
point.
can it automatically be put back in?
No.
It'd have to be,
Well, but it wasn't, it was not deliberately removed, it was, so an accident's gonna take what?
but they approved it with the new, without
I
it.
understand, they
Wait,
approved
wait,
it with the
wait.
intent that it was in there.
Wait a minute. If it was a problem in uploading, and it was approved by the board with the wording in there, okay? And it didn't get uploaded as a Secretary of State's office, then the Secretary of State's office can put it back in.
But Tammy doesn't
But-
recall it being that way.
But if it was approved by the board without that wording, and that was what was uploaded, then that's what the rule is.
And we're stuck
Right.
with what it
Okay?
currently is.
So that's the
on
difference,
Secretary.
Right.
okay?
But
And I
would they,
believe
did the board
approved it
consciously
without
know
that.
that wasn't in there? And as thick as all of that stuff is, my guess is, nobody said, oh,
Doesn't matter, whether they did it consciously or unconsciously,
I
if they
think-
approved it without that wording, then that's what the rule is.
so if we move forward thinking that those words, or a combination of those words, or a modification of those words need to go back in, we just move forward with rulemaking.
Exactly.
Right.
Or if nothing else, it could be a guide to what we're doing.
is there anybody
We
that
don't have
objects
to
to
reinvent
that?
the wheel.
Well, I think that's exactly, we're here to do rulemaking, so let's
But
just
there's no objection
have the
to
board
having that
consider
put back in.
those, that language, and this group consider
So
it.
we need to see
make
all
a
of that,
recommendation.
so you'll send that out.
So here's what I was
Does that
kind of,
bother you, the sun, okay?
I'm thinking about moving over there.
You might need to get your little sunscreen over there.
Close those farther, if they're hungry.
Steve, how'd you get all burned up today? Well, I attended a board meeting.
Yeah.
That's why I got those
Well,
stripes on
and
it.
just to kind of clarify though, I mean, based on what the Attorney General's office was saying over here though, it may be a moot point if the statute doesn't allow for that option. And so that's kind of the first question. Do we get a ruling on that?
Allow for what option?
Put it back in.
The idea that, so the rule language that said that these disclosures could be included in another contract and not a separate form. So that language,
Right.
that part of the rule. I think there's a question whether
Yeah, well,
that part of the rule is even allowable.
And I have no recollection, I'm too old.
That's my line.
But there is value to not have it, as you referred to earlier, being part of a purchase agreement or buyer's order, that it does stand out as a separate form and helps the division. Because here, we need to give you consumers added protection, a different document that's not part of a, 24-inch long purchase agreement. Maybe that's what was behind it. It was, certainly there's recorded somewhere.
Oh.
That's what I'm gonna have to work, but oh boy.
Oh.
And where am I gonna find a reel-to-reel 1959 model to play it
Sounds like
on?
a
And does it
personal
matter?
issue.
And
Does it-
really,
does it
why not just
matter?
decide what should it be? and-
Precisely, will it matter, or should we just, I can PDF
Take it as
this, and I
input,
can send it to you
and
guys,
then-
so you guys can look at it and decide if you wanna, maybe incorporate that into part of this whole scheme, I don't know.
here's where, let me throw this out. I would like a look at the AG's draft. Let's work off of the AG's draft. Not this minute, for the next meeting. Look at the AG's draft for the new rule and the AG's draft for the disclosure form. I'll resend those out to everybody, and I will send out the old language that was in the old rule prior to sunset. And you all can take a look at all of that and give suggestions back. I could send all of that out by the end of the week. I could ask you to have your suggestions back a week in advance or something like that of the next and final meeting. See where we're at that point in time. And call a meeting in 3 weeks, something like that, of this group, one more. How does that fit with everybody?
I mean, are there some aspects of it we want to just discuss today that
We could.
have some discussion on it?
Well,
Or-
you can.
I would suggest modifying some of the rules to address some of the things we've agreed on, that, for instance, the 3 versus 10-day thing.
Yeah, that one.
You know, I mean, I think,
A modification of that before it goes back out?
yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. So
I
we're not,
agree.
okay.
And I'll just say that there's a number of issues in the language that we talked about the very first meeting, you know, a year and a half ago on this, that are back in there again. And so, and then there's the legal size thing, which we would just really love to not have to do this legal size and trying to get this verbiage as concise and to the point as possible so that we're not dealing with legal size forms to the extent possible.
How important is that? I mean, your retail installment your retail installment contract is legal.
Yeah, I mean-
Your buyer's orders, are they legal?
No.
Some of them are.
I mean, I look at it 2 ways. One is, the longer and more verbose a form is, the less likely people are to read it.
They won't.
Is the first point. And it just becomes a hassle in terms of forms and costs and other aspects. So, I mean, the cost is one. I mean, it costs more to do legal. It's just kind of a pain, and the more we're dealing with moving forms to electronic, they're gonna be printed on 8.5 by 11, as a lot of dealers move more to the laser form. So just to the extent that we can do it and say what we wanna say, I would love to see us try to do that.
You're getting no pushback from me on that issue. I think
And
the issue is,
that's okay.
can we get the font at the right font?
You know, and that's a broader, I mean, without it being ridiculously small,
Then you're looking at 2 pages.
Or a shorter form.
you know, I think that this could be really condensed and say what we need to say. I think the more, most states, the more verbose it is, the less likely people are to read it.
I don't think there's any debate on that.
The existing form, the way it is, where the initials are, it's 8.5 by 11, and it's A, B, C, D. I mean, that's how simplistic it's gotta be in order to get it covered. You get the legalese and the law, and no personal, I understand what you have to do. But somehow it's gotta be condensed.
So I think there's
And
kind of too much in there, and there's too much.
Probably no guarantee, and let's get on with it.
And, you know, putting in the monthly payment and the number of months, that goes over and above what the statute requires, and it's just another layer of repeating
What's already in the
items that are in a contract versus focusing on the key disclosures. And, you know, I don't know if we can get away from actually having an APR that you cannot exceed. You know, one of the initial reasons that we wanted to see rulemaking on this is our concern that it was a TILA problem just to have the fact that you put in an interest rate that cannot be exceeded, when in reality, it's not even binding. It doesn't even mean anything unless they've signed another agreement to commit to that interest rate. And TILA has certain disclosures. I mean, I think that was the original reason that one of the original.
Tiller wouldn't permit you to do
I
a
agree
second
with
one.
Mike's memo on that.
You
You
know,
know what the solution to that
That
is?
was.
Yes, no, you
Next time
take
we're gonna
the
do
risk. Geez,
You know.
every problem, there's the same solution.
I do like not having that in there.
This creates confusion. I mean, it's redundant too. I mean, if it's the interest rate that's in your risk, it's redundant.
Well,
If
see,
it's a
that-
different interest rate, it's an agreement to agree and isn't binding on anybody.
And see, that's evidence, I think, that that form isn't to be used with a risk, because it would be redundant. I mean, just the fact that it would be redundant means there was never an intention to use that with a risk.
The legislature said,
Yeah, and the problem is that, the problem is that language.
I'm never gonna convince you, Rick, I'll keep my mouth shut.
But to your point, though, I mean, that language is in there about not greater than a certain APR
Right.
rate. It says a certain APR. It doesn't necessarily dictate
what it is.
What
one
it
we
is.
have to refer
Correct.
to,
Thank
or
you.
that we have to write in a different one. I mean, that doesn't go to the issue of the first part of the statute that excludes.
But it fits with the
Retail.
buyer's order, and it doesn't fit when you have a retail installment
And what
contract.
we talked about initially was, how do we make this so the consumer better understands it? Simplicity makes it better understood. And throwing in as bold as you want, there's no guarantee in finance. I mean, I don't think anybody has any objection to that. So how do we simplistically keep the form 8.5 by 11? I said keep the form. So I think, I
We'll
mean,
work
let's go
on
back.
that, we'll work on that. So we'll work on getting the form to one page. We'll work on that, okay? We will redraft the proposed regulation to update what your suggestion. Send that out along with what was there before in the regulation, let everybody have input.
And can I just make one more comment on the, sorry to do this, but on the proposed rule as it is, because this was a big point of contention in the last time we looked at this, and it has changed a fair amount, but defining down payment to be money or a trade-in, and I know there may be a rationale to do it just based on how the rule's structured right now, but I just hate to see us define anything in a rule that goes against how most people look at it. I mean, most people think of a down payment as money, cash, check, and a trade-in is a trade-in. Defining a down payment to include a trade-in, I think it just goes against the way most people think of those terms, so.
61708 talks about it in those terms.
It refers to collateral and down payment,
Talks
I
about
believe.
trade.
So, but I don't think we should define down payment as a trade-in. I think we should talk, use them however you need to, or put the terms in as they are commonly understood,
Separate them?
would be my
Ms.
point.
McCoy, are you arguing against clarity and definition?
No, I'm arguing that if you define something to include something that's not normally used that way, then when we say down payment, everyone's gonna be confused, because when people see down payment, they're not gonna think trade-in, they're gonna think money and cash. And it's perhaps more of an educational issue with dealer personnel as well as consumers, because nobody's gonna think of down payment as being a trade-in. So my upfront point is just not defining things in a way that goes against the commonly understood definition. So refer to them separately if we have to.
Aren't they broke out separate on the contract too? You have down payment.
They
you
usually
have-
are.
Yeah,
and-
you're gonna show your equity and
So, I mean,
basically, yeah.
they're two
so-
separate issues, they're not
Yeah.
one.
I'm going off memory, but I thought it was down payment, you had cash.
Some of them will do, basically a down payment and then have, basically trade-in equity or something like that. They'll
Right,
do
they
it that
break
way.
it down into
They'll put them
The
down
trade
there,
is a
but,
separate language
Right.
that
From
describes
cash,
what,
but I
Right.
think they're all
but it
down.
describes the trade.
trade. The bottom line is, just it's all gonna reduce whatever the purchase price is gonna
But
be,
they're
but
two
they're
separate
separated,
things.
right, they're
Not
separated
one.
out.
But the point is, the terminology in this rule is what's gonna be used in this form, and if this is the form that people are looking at and dealership personnel are looking at, you don't think of down payment as including a trade-in, generally speaking. So it's just, it's an
Maybe it's
upfront
separate.
point, and maybe there's different
I
opinions
I
on
will
that.
tell you, some of those definitions that we put in there, I don't know that every one of them are NADA definitions, just so you NADA definition.
Yeah, I went and got the NADA, and we'll just see. Okay. NADA's guide has deposit as being buyer's money which is held by the dealer to hold a vehicle until the paperwork is completed. The deposit is then credited towards a down payment. Then for down payment, they have cash or net trade-in made as partial payment by buyer at the time of sale, time of vehicle purchase. Sorry, I have my glasses on. Let me try that again. Down payment, cash or net trade-in made as partial payment by buyer at the time of vehicle purchase.
So net trade is talking about the equity.
Yes.
So it's cash.
So I would just have to differ with NADA's definition.
I'm just saying that's where the
That's
AG
where it
was
came from. Yeah,
getting
okay.
the language from.
It's just, if you're talking about a disclosure form to make things clear, to me, it muddles the issue, and because the deceptive trade practices 61708 specifically refers to down payment and collateral, those definitions matter, and they're gonna be on the form, so. That's interesting that that's how they. What is that from, actually, the NADA definition?
NADA's website has glossary of commonly used,
Just that appraisal
commonly
site,
used terms
website of
within
it.
the motor vehicle industry.
What year?
Like last week.
She said it was a website.
No, it's very recent.
No, that's interesting, actually.
So, conceptually, is everybody okay with conceptually us moving ahead that way? One more time?
I think if we just get one form to work from,
And it would be helpful, actually.
yeah, it just, if we keep getting 3 different forms, and I promise I won't submit anything.
So, well, here's what we need, I think, Will, Whitey and the three of us will sit down and we will relook at the two proposed regulations, one for power sports, obviously. And we will recraft those based upon, for sure, that 3-day thing.
Right.
We'll look at the form and see if we can somehow get that to close to 1 page, okay?
1 8 by 11 page.
And we'll send that out along with what used to be in the rule, and then comment the hell out of that.
Okay.
Would that be doable? Comment the hell out of that. Get those comments a week in advance of the next meeting. I will compile those, and either do like what we did this time, we incorporate those comments that we think are very good comments into another draft and send all of that out prior to the next meeting, along with all the comments. Is that a workable solution? Now, what I'm gonna have to do is I'm gonna have to call a 5-minute break here, because I have to go get on to see when this room is available. You did get it? Okay, good. So, everybody,
So is the APR and the terms still on the table then, or are those out for the new document?
In the form?
Yeah. Sounds to me like we all agree that they should have been out. That,
Well, APR has to be in there by the rule. By the statute actually says.
The statute.
But it doesn't say you have to put something in.
It says
Doesn't have-
may
yeah.
exceed a certain APR.
Doesn't have to-
Basically, all
Right.
you'd have to do is maybe put, will not exceed.
The range
specified.
In the retail
retail
sales contract. That's all you have to do.
contract
Yeah,
could
that's all
be-
you have to do.
right.
Say that again?
The APR will not exceed the, or set forth in the retail sales contract. Right.
Is that a certain APR?
Got a second comment.
Couldn't make it properly socks on the radio, so I had to find something else to say.
no, okay, I'm just looking at the page.
Model socks.
So has everybody got their calendars? So here's where we're at right now. I'm gonna just say that next week, the next 2 weeks, for our next meeting, not that we can't do work and get it to you, for the next 3 weeks, I think a meeting is gonna be very difficult. The next 3 weeks. After this week. So, the first, second, and third week of March, I think a meeting on this is going to be difficult. So, everybody look at their calendar for the week of the 23rd. Chris is off that week. How about, let me ask you this, what does your calendars look like? We have a board meeting on the 17th. Which is March, boy, we're gonna use that, there's a chance we use that second board meeting, which is the 26th.
You've got a board meeting,
You've got a hearing set for the 26th.
26th. So let me ask you this, what does the 18th and 19th look like?
Out of town.
March Madness out of town.
Wow.
That is when it starts.
Yeah.
What does March 31st look like?
Here.
Good.
March 31st, that's the last day of the month, that's a Thursday.
Tuesday, yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm good on that.
This open, March 31st.
The Thursday?
Tuesday.
7 in the morning?
Tammy and I will be on speakerphone.
I'm just asking.
Won't let me enter it on here, but this room is available that day.
Rick, is that okay? 1 o'clock?
Mr. Perkins?
For me?
Okay, so March 31st, I'll do a calendar invite for March 31st, a little later on this afternoon for everybody here, for the fourth meeting. What we will try to do is between now and probably a week from today, get you some redrafts out. And if you could have that, your suggestions back in by like the 20th. Who's off that week of this? People off the week of the 16th?
I am, well, part of it, but,
Well, if we could get you some information for you to look at by a week from today,
okay.
which is Tuesday to, I'm sorry, today is March the 3rd. So if we could get that,
Okay, yeah.
would that give plenty of time for everybody to have it back by the 20th?
Yep.
Yes, sir.
So back by the 20th, recompile that, I could email you that out on the 24th, 25th, 26th, someplace in there, so you have some time to look at it before the 31st.
Are you all able to send it out in Word and then we can redline it to be able to submit our comments more easily, or? I mean, I guess I can always convert it, as a thought, I would think everybody may want to redline comments on there to streamline the submission process, or?
I don't know that it makes that much difference.
Okay, all right.
I really don't.
Sending it out in Word.
Yeah, if we send it out in Word, we get red line from you, and then I get another red line from you, I have to merge them. Before we merge them.
Word perfect.
We don't have to merge it, but what it does is it allows me to embed my comments in the actual text, and then, I mean, you can compare them and decide, what you want to incorporate or not.
That's not a problem.
That, okay.
All right, so, yeah,
I'm gonna write the margins. Do a pen.
Withdraw that.
all right, so that's what we will do then. We'll go by that plan. It puts us back a little longer than I had hoped to, but that's
You'd love to see
okay.
it, so you could.
So let's work towards that, see if we can come up with that, and I don't have much else to say. Is everybody happy? Okay, ending the recording session of this meeting at 3:15. Thank you all.